Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, we bring you a two-part show. First up tonight, the newest face in the Walsh administration, and an important one at that. Mayor Marty Walsh did a nationwide search to find a new fire commissioner and found the best candidate right here in his own backyard. Deputy Chief Joe Finn was selected to become the newest Boston Fire Commissioner. Tonight, you'll meet him and find out what his priorities are in the new administration. Then in the second half, we shift gears back to politics, as is our usual wont. Tonight in that section, money, the mother's milk of politics. Of course, since the Citizens United ruling by the Supreme Court, all bets are off and most limits off on contributions by corporations, labor unions, and nonprofits. Tonight, a wily veteran of the campaign world, Jim Spencer from the Campaign Network, joins us to talk about changes in how campaigns are run and, of course, some of the new disclosure requirements that the state of Massachusetts is considering. All that and more tonight on Talk of the Neighborhoods. All right, we're back with Talking the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, a two-part show, and in this first half, meet the newest face of the Walsh administration. After a nationwide search, Mayor Marty Walsh decided the best candidate to become the new Boston Fire Commissioner was one of his own from Dorchester even, and of course he is currently a deputy chief in the Boston Fire Department, and pleased to have joining us tonight, Commissioner Joe Finn.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure to be here.
How's that sound? We bumped into each other in the hallway, and I said, you know, you don't look bad in civilian clothes, but
it'll take a little getting used to.
Yeah.
It's surreal, but it's quite an honor and privilege, to be honest with you.
Well, of course, you know, you have how many years in the Boston Fire Department, and nonetheless, to put your name forward, was it kind of daunting? And then how did you feel when you found out that you were selected?
Well, I have 30 years in the department, and I've held various positions throughout the department. I think I have a vast knowledge of the administration and the personnel component of the job. I was the personnel chief for almost 5 years, which basically dealt with all the recruitment, hiring, discipline, everything that goes along with that, and promotions and so on. I was, after a long thought process, I had to certainly run it by the real boss, my wife, to see if she was up for she was up for the challenge of, you know, in the scrutiny and the things that come with being in the public eye. And she said, if you want to go for it, go for it. So we did, and when the mayor called me last Thursday, no, actually 2 Thursdays ago now, that he was selected me, I was kind of I was thunderstruck. You know, it was a great choice, I thought, for myself. And I was honored and privileged that the mayor actually came down to me and selected me.
Well, of course, you were up against some stiff competition. The current chief in Pittsburgh, if I recall, and one from former chief from Buffalo. I don't know if I have those right, but certainly a couple very capable individuals as well. How do you feel about, of course, taking the reins? You know, you've worked with your colleagues, your brothers and sisters in the department on the front lines, and of course, and now to be put in the position of leadership. What's your philosophy on that? How do you approach it? And do you think that'll take a little getting used to?
Well, first off, the Boston Fire Department is the oldest and finest in the nation, and I say that with all sincerity. That was proven on Beacon Street back in March. The colleagues are very supportive. They understand. They've gone through a very turbulent few years, if you will. We've been kind of broadly painted as a bunch of unscrupulous people, I would say, and I find that to be absolutely false. I think 98% of this job has done a wonderful job coming to work every day and doing their job and protecting the citizens of Boston. that 1 or 2%, they'll be dealt with. I mean, you know, a new day's here, new era of accountability and responsibility. And for the 98% of the job that comes to work every day and does a great job for the citizens of Boston, that's what I'm here for.
Well, of course, and you were well aware of it, that Mayor Walsh was under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of pressure, the suggestion being that he was too friendly with the Boston Fire Department, specifically members of the Boston Firefighters Union, and that as a result he couldn't fairly deal with them. Now he selects a member of the department. Do you feel some undue pressure or responsibility to kind of stand up to the union, so to speak? I know he was questioned at length about that, and said that, you're going to be now leading people, and you have, don't get me wrong, in your current position, but people that you once worked, arm in arm with instead of leading them.
Well, I think that was proven back in February or so when we were at the bargaining table, and Local 718, President Rich Paris, came to the table, and I sat as the Unit B rep, which meant that I represented the district and deputy chiefs at the bargaining table. And we bring what we see as management changes that need to be brought forward to bring the job forward. And the cooperation, which is attributed directly to Mayor Walsh, that the spirit of cooperation, there was going to be bilateral discussions, and that we was going to be a cooperative, approach to bargaining, which we weren't used to, proved to be 100% accurate, because we ended up with some substantive management changes that we never would have attained under the past administration because of the adversarial and acrimonious relationship. We got some significant changes in limited duty and injured leave language. We got sick leave reforms. We disincented sick leave. We went back to what we call the acting list for filling vacancies, where we had the most qualified person in the front seat directing companies. And we moved the seniority up, that you could not be in charge of a fire company unless you have more than 3 years on the job. Those are substantive changes that will bring safety, accountability, and more controls from the management perspective of the job. Is it an end-all, be-all? Absolutely not. I mean, you go to the table the first time, you can't expect to have the type of, a one-sided conversation,
right,
if you will. So I commend the local for coming to the table and
in good faith.
In good faith, and Mayor Walsh set the tone, and we got substantive changes, and that we never would have attained. We would have been back in arbitration, which would have been more costly to the taxpayers. It would have been, again, an acrimonious, adversarial relationship, and Mayor Walsh wasn't going to tolerate it. So he came to the table in good faith, and we were able to achieve a deal.
Those fears unfounded, in your opinion, then?
I'd say they're unfounded. I think the proof's in the pudding. We went there. Sure. It's going to take a little time, and when I say time, the full implementation of the contract, there's provisions of the contract that won't become effective until like January of 15. For a number of readers, administrative changes that need to take place within the payroll system and things like that. But I think the city will see some cost savings, significant cost savings with some of these safeguards.
Well, certainly there's great respect for Boston firefighters, and several, not the least of which is the Marathon bombing, and of course you mentioned the recent fire down on Beacon Street. But what do you see as the biggest priorities for the Boston Fire Department, the changes that you would like to see made going forward?
Well, there's a few things that ring in my head. Other than just getting my finger on the pulse, if you will, of the administrative side of the business. Cancer's ravaging our job. Members, we're probably getting a newly diagnosed case like every 10 days from members.
I just read in the paper a firefighter in Lawrence was exposed to hazardous materials. I'm sure that's not unheard of.
Oh, it's the norm now, and a lot of that's related to the plastic industry, the synthetics of material, building materials versus, the natural components, wood, paper, cloth that were years ago. Yeah. So when they combustible, they put off some very toxic gases which permeate, the skin in different areas. So the cancer thing is certainly a health and safety initiative that I want to get deeply embedded with, because quite frankly, I've buried too many friends in the last 30 years not to make it and see the devastation that occurs in families when that happens. So that's a health and safety component. Our infrastructure suffered tremendously. The firehouses, they're old. We haven't had a firehouse built in the last 20 years. It's, the infrastructure's in real, if you will, difficult and needs a lot of work. So we got to work with them, and we know we got budget constraints, and we know, capital planning and so on. But we need to work with the mayor's team and decide how we move forward. The firehouses and so on.
Well, lots to do, and of course, always costs involved, and money ultimately becomes the issue. Now, you were, as I mentioned, deputy chief and in charge of one of the busiest districts in the city, and in fact, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were supervisor or in charge of the day of the fire down on Beacon Street, which still burns in a lot of people's souls, and not to use that phrase, but a tough time. To bury
it was a very difficult.
Two of your colleagues, and I can't imagine what that was like.
A very difficult day for the Boston Fire Department. In my 30 years, I've never seen a fire grow with so rapidly and with such ferocity, and in such short period of time. I mean, fires of that nature are not supposed to happen at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon on a sunny day in the Back Bay. Right now we're conducting a couple reviews or investigations, one external, one internal. I've met with the external folks on NIOSH on interviews and findings and so on. That day of the fire, it was kind of like it was like the perfect storm. It was a wind-driven fire, which we had wind gusts up that day from up to 60 miles an hour, sustained at 40, coming in the rear of the building, driving the fire forward. That's probably the major contributing factor of how rapidly that fire spread. There were some key decisions made that day, not just by myself. I was surrounded by some very competent district chiefs who were feeding me timely information that played in the decision-making process. I had my counterpart in the other division. The city has two fire divisions. One's Division 1, Division 2, who self-dispatched when you heard the Mayday calls and assisted me by taking the rear of the building, because those buildings, as you well know, there's no easy way to get to the rear from the front. So there was a lot going on in the rear that I couldn't see visually. He was my eyes and ears out back, was giving me timely information. The district chief that responded, initial district chief responded, made some key decisions that saved a number of them residents' lives. It's amazing to me, as when I rolled in at probably 10 minutes after the first alarm, that we didn't lose a civilian life in that building. And we've have, confirmation, I should say, but congratulatory letters from residents who attribute that they're alive today because of the Boston firefighters and the actions of Lieutenant Walsh and Michael Kennedy.
Well, as it turned out, life and death decisions, and it's got to be tough. How do you deal with that? And I know, I'm sure you learned a lot from that day, and as you have throughout the course of your career. But as you look back at that, what were the key lessons you learned, and how do you deal with that? I mean, that's got to be tough. How does any firefighter, not just a chief, deal with a fire like that takes your brother's lives?
Well, I'd be lying to you if I told you I don't think about it at times, certainly. I mean, I've witnessed many valiant attempts that day to try to save Lieutenant Walsh and firefighter Kennedy, and the fact that we were able to rescue a number of civilians over ladders and get them out of the building and so on. It's troublesome when you look and see, like, Lieutenant Walsh, who his wife, Kristen Walsh, is probably one of the most remarkable women I've ever met, strong, 3 young children. Michael Kennedy, his mother's a sweetheart. She started a foundation to try to better the safety and protection for firefighters. She's going to be launching that very shortly. And just two terrific men. It's difficult. you know, certainly for the members of Engine 33 and Ladder 15, they're comrades. You know, it's a dangerous job, and at times, you know, this isn't the first time we've been through things like these. So, you know, you just kind of stick together and you go through it, and you hopefully, you know, it doesn't occur again. But, you know, just it's difficult. I'll tell you that. You know what I mean, for a number of people.
There was a op-ed piece in the Globe suggesting that maybe firefighters should be pulled out of those situations earlier, and you know, I'm paraphrasing here, or summarizing is probably a better word, that you somehow firefighters might be better to, you know, not go into buildings that are in that kind of condition. And of course, no one could know when. No one would have known the way that it.
Well, let me put it to you this way: if your loved ones were in that building that day, would you want us to make every attempt to save them? Mm-hmm. So that's what we do, and that's the profession we chose. That's how we're trained, and you count on your training, your experience to guide you through them bad days. And like I told you, I have a number of emails from residents of the building which say they owe our life to us. And the fact that the initial incident commander made some key decisions once he recognized it was a wind-driven fire. They got an interior attack line placed, protected the interior stairs so people could self-evacuate. And you know, the ones that couldn't were taken over aerial ladder in the rear. So to those naysayers who think we should not go in, that's not what we do. I mean, that's what we're trained for. That's the proud profession we serve. And again, I ask those op-ed people or those opinion people, if it was them or their loved ones, would they prefer we stood on the street when we can make that save? Right. I think we'd make the save. Well,
and again, those are tough decisions, sometimes life and death decisions. You know, personally, I couldn't be proud of what you and your colleagues did that day. But now, there's been a number of fires. There's another tragic fire up in Lowell just over the weekend. Is the nature of the business, so to speak, changing? You talked about different materials that are in play now, but it seems like just lately there's been a rash of fires here, and you know, a reminder of how much we need you.
Right.
I'm just wondering about the, and I don't know if you'd call it an art or a science of firefighting. Has it changed as a result?
Well, Boston's a very unique city. You know, it's all the way back, I mean, how many years? The fire department's 1628, I believe, okay? We have our very, if you will, difficult areas in the city to fight fires. Beacon Hill, that back bay, the North End. Those are very difficult places to fight fire just because of the congestion, the densely populated. You have old construction. Those are very difficult challenges. But I'll tell you this, the tactics and strategies that the Boston Fire Department utilizes in the course of everyday business are sound. The people of Boston should know that. I mean, those tactics and strategies were developed over years of experience from my predecessors and on. So we have, as a Boston Fire Department, have a good handle on how we need to fight fires in the city of Boston. We know our neighborhoods, we're in the neighborhoods, we know the building construction, we know the congestion, and we know how how important it is to get to the fire and to get them first lines advanced. So.
Well, there's always a suggestion, and of course there's always ways to improve, and I'm sure that's what you're about as well, but you know, the suggestion that the Boston Fire Department is a dinosaur and dire need of reform, and do you see it that way?
Not at all. I mean, listen, as I said, Joe, I mean, we had our troubles in the past. Again, by a limited number of firefighters, okay? Reform. What does reform mean? Someone from the outside has to define reform. What are we trying to achieve? Now, granted, again, I could go back to, and it's been pointed out, sick leave. We've addressed that in this contract. Injury leave, we addressed that in this contract. So we have a collective bargaining agreement that we have to work with. And again, President Paris came to the table and understood we need to make them changes.
Good guy.
To get to accountability, and we're going to make more changes as we go forward. Reform, it's funny when when we went through some of them tough years, if you will, and listened to, if you will, the pundits with the reform mantra.
Oh, yeah.
There's statistics that are unique to Boston where when you look at major capital cities, Boston has the lowest fire death rate of any major capital city right now. That says something.
So say what you will.
Right, say what you will. And granted, like I just said, we need to get a house in order on some things, and we're working towards that. We just achieved that. But our firefighting prowess is there. We're here for the citizens of Boston, so they know that we're going to be there for them.
Well, I don't think anybody questions your professional capability, and the thought that some have suggested is, why do a nationwide search when you have kind of people like Joe Finn in the department?
Well, I applaud the mayor. I mean, the mayor wasn't going to take it on face value. He went out and looked to see what other candidates could be out there. It's funny when people talk about change and how we're going to achieve change. They need a change. This, if you will, mantra: change, change, change. Every management book I ever read, especially in larger organizations, change got to come from within. You need people who know the organization to make the change. And change for what? Change sake, or change to move the job forward? I have a vision on some things that I think we'll be able to achieve with the Firefighters Union, and this job will move forward. And there will be change. Nothing stays stagnant. There will be change. And I'm confident we'll achieve that.
Well, of course, the big day is coming up. You are now the interim commissioner. The formal swearing in is coming up July 24th.
That's what I'm told.
And that will be a big day for you and your family.
Certainly will.
I'm sure. Where will that be held?
We're kind of undecided at the moment. We're waiting to confirm a spot. It certainly will be an exciting day for myself, certainly, and my family, and people who care about me, sure.
Well, they must be very excited. Now, I know you currently live in Quincy. There's been a lot of talk about the whole residency ordinance, and will you be moving back into the city of Boston? You're a Dorchester boy, born and bred.
I spend half my day in Dorchester now, but absolutely. The mayor and I discussed the whole residency piece and myself moving back, and I have no problem with that, and I believe I should be here. I mean, I told the mayor that I'm going to be responding to a lot of incidents. I need to be able to get the proximity is important. I need to be back in the city. So if something happens, whatever time of day that I think requires my attention, I'll be there. So I have no problem with that, and I think it's for myself as the fire commissioner of the city of Boston, it's the right thing to do.
We appreciate it. We love to see one of our own appointed here, and well, thank you for coming in tonight.
Thank you for having me.
About it, and congratulations again. July 24th, Deputy Chief Joe Finn becomes the official commissioner of the Boston Fire Department here tonight on Talking the Neighborhoods. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
When we come back, we'll change gears, shift gears as our usual want, back to politics. Joining us, Jim Spencer from the Campaign Network. We'll be talking about what else? Money, the mother's milk of politics. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. And in the second half, we'll shift gears back to our preferred topic, of course, politics. And once you talk politics, what is the mother's milk of politics? What else? Money. And I've got the perfect guy here to talk about the way it's changing and how campaigns are changing as a result of it. Jim Spencer is the founder and principal owner of the Campaign Network and has worked in countless campaigns across the country, going back to the Kennedy years, and he's an old friend, nice enough to come by and join us tonight. Jim, thanks for coming.
You bet.
Nice to see you here.
Well, you didn't talk politics to the commissioner?
No, well, just maybe a little bit. But this is, more of the prurient variety here, talking about campaigns and money and the role. I mean, of course, money has always had a major role in campaigns, but since the advent of the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, this is a horse of a different color.
It's changed the ball game completely. And we're seeing it reflected here in Massachusetts. We certainly saw it reflected.
It's not just a presidential race.
Well, what happened is because it was a Supreme Court decision, you know, the states, every state had to adapt to it in some way or another. And so our, financial, arm here, OCPF, had to come up with a group of rules and regulations that would honor Citizens United, and it changed the whole ballgame. And, you clearly saw that in the mayor's race. I mean, millions of dollars were spent in that mayor's race, and millions of dollars were spent on the outside by the last, the two finalists, by both Marty Walsh, I think spent almost $1.5 million, $2 million on the outside. I think that John Connolly maybe spent $1 million on the outside.
When you say on the outside, tell us what that means.
Well, what that means is that what Citizens United, allowed people to do, the ruling was that outside groups could spend money on behalf of candidates. Right. And the one thing they're forbidden from doing is what's called collusion. So what it means is that any organization, in John Connolly's case, it was some charter school groups.
Right.
In Marty Walsh's, it was clearly labor. Labor nationally,
right.
Because they really wanted a strong labor guy here in Boston. Boston's a big labor town, and so they could give unlimited amounts of money, to this PAC. They're really 527s on the federal level is what they're called, but it's a PAC for all practical purposes. And then the one thing they couldn't do is they couldn't sit and collude with the campaign and say, well, I'll tell you what, you guys do the advertisements on these days and we'll do the advertisements on these days. But otherwise, it's no holds barred. And then when we had the race with Warren, and what's his name again? He's in New Hampshire now.
It might have moved.
You had that
Brown.
famous People's Pledge,
yep.
and it was really interesting because Scott Brown thought he was being very smart. He said, look, I'm going to keep the outside Democratic money out of here. I'm not sure how much Republican money I'll get because I'm a pretty moderate Republican. Republicans are pretty conservative. And he thought that was really going to be smart, not knowing that Elizabeth Warren, created the greatest U.S. Senate fundraising machine that we've ever had in history, mostly from the internet.
And to be clear, and I want people to understand this, individual donations are still limited.
Yes. Although there's a law that's passed going through the State House right now. I think it's due to pass this week. That's going to raise limits for individuals in Massachusetts from $500 to $1,000. Right. And Joe, that's a really important law. I mean, in Massachusetts, we have a very small limit. I mean, I work in states like Louisiana and Texas. In Texas, the limit is $5,000, and individual for individuals, and corporations can give $5,000. In Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, there are no limits. And in Massachusetts, the limit is $500 per individual. Now, that doesn't make a campaign any cheaper. It just means that the candidate has to spend 3 times as much time raising money from many more people.
Smaller increments.
And so now finally they're changing that law for there's going to be a $1,000 limit instead of $500 limits, which is a very important reform for Massachusetts. Unfortunately, it's not going to go into effect this year. It's interesting how people who pass laws that are legislators don't want that's the laws that got them. They don't want to change it this year.
And to a certain extent, but really, or at least the more publicized aspect of that law is the disclosure requirements.
Yes.
Because there's an attempt to force donors to these 527s
yes.
or whatever, and tell people what those are.
Again, that's, what most people call that, we call it dark money. It's like when millions of dollars, thousands of dollars, but on the federal level, millions of dollars flow into these 527s and these PACs, and you don't know who gives the money.
And you don't have to report it.
You don't have to report it. Well, it depends. Yeah, some of it you have to report. Some of it you don't have to report. It depends on exactly what kind of organization
you have. Or you don't have to report it until afterwards.
Yes, you don't have to report it till it's too late to do anything about it. And so, sunshine is the best disinfectant. As both a political consultant and as a good Democrat and being a very pro-democracy person, I kind of have, I've kind of come to peace with the Citizens United decision. What's important is that we have disclosure. We need to know where money is coming from. It's always been frustrating for me in Massachusetts because I work for very progressive candidates, and I work for many candidates, and you know some of the races I've
Sure.
been involved in, and you know people who have less money, they work for poor people, they represent poor communities, but even the poorest candidate in Massachusetts might know one millionaire. But that millionaire could only give him $500.
Right.
It's kind of wrong. So, it's good that we made that change, and it's good that they're doing here in Massachusetts. They're having to disclose money, so you don't have this dark money, so you know where the money came from.
Well, and for instance, for example, there was an organization, and I can't remember, it was like One Fund something, Boston, that spent nearly $500,000 to support Marty Walsh.
Right, the very end of the campaign.
And couldn't find out who it was. It turns out it was money that was donated, and correct me if I'm wrong here, through teachers' unions to a organization in New Jersey, which then donated it to this fund here.
Well, the last one fund, there was a Boston name associated with it, and it was a woman who was like a housewife in West Roxbury or something. She was not even politically involved, because you can set up these kind of shell, game things.
But my point is, and it's not because people have a tendency to think of, well, they think about this dark money. They think of the Cook brothers, very ultra conservatives from corporate billionaires and donating to these, right-wing causes and candidates, but it's not just.
Oh no, we do
the
it
conservative
on. We
movement.
clearly do it on our side, and we better, for God's sakes. I mean, you gotta. I mean, these. Look at. It's like I always tell people. It's campaigns are a zero-sum game. They're a war. There are only winners and there's losers. And if somebody is going to use, I'm not going to bring a knife to a gunfight. And so if we have to be armed the same way that they are. And now very much so the Democrats are. I mean, we don't have.
Well, you said you to a certain extent made peace with this.
Yeah, I've always said, it's like, look, it's the Supreme Court ruling. I mean, the real problem with money in politics is about disclosure. As long as and I think you could have much more instant disclosure than we have now. I mean, the way things work, like in city council races in Boston, it's great. Every month, you got to report your money, and you got to report where it comes from, and it gets published. So you know where money is coming into a campaign. And today, in the day of the internet, there should be no excuses to not have instant disclosure. I think what the general public doesn't understand is that, we have a system in America is that you have to have money to get your message through. If you don't have money, you can't run a campaign. I have won.
No matter how much you might hope or wish that was all.
You don't have to have more money, Joe, than the other person. I've won many campaigns. I've had won campaigns where I've been outspent 20 to 1. But you have to have enough money to be able to get your message out. And I've seen many campaigns with millions of dollars where consultants just kind of came in there and sucked them dry, and they didn't really do the right thing. So you still have to have the skill base. You still have to know what you're doing. You still have to be able to spend the money correctly, but you got to have enough money to compete.
Yet, and talking about the law, there was an editorial in today's Globe about that particular bill and about disclosure. And, according to the Globe's interpretation, the Massachusetts Teachers Association is attempting to derail that.
Well, they would, because
should we be surprised?
No, I mean,
despite
it's kind of it's like Casablanca, right?
Yes.
There's gambling here. I'm shocked. I'm shocked. Look, the MTA as an organization is the most powerful spending entity in the state of Massachusetts, and has been for maybe 20 years.
Right.
MTA is a very large organization.
Look at their lobbying.
We have a lot of teachers. We have a lot of, and so as a union, they've always been able to spend money under our laws in campaigns. So it's kind of in their vested interest maybe to keep things the way that they are instead of, changing that. And it used to be that I think that teachers were always viewed positively, blah, blah, blah. It's just not that way now. It's more controversial and less so in this state. I mean, teachers are still very well regarded in this state. I mean, in states like I work in Texas, we really try to bury the teachers' money, because not everybody, you have very conservative
nobody wants
people,
that endorsement, right?
Right, exactly. It's different.
But now let's look at some of the races. Of course, all the attention this year is on the gubernatorial race. And what about the influence of political action committee money or 527 money,
Well, it's
will we see that? I mean, there's been
Yeah,
some
I
talk
think you
about
will.
a
You
People's
know.
Pledge again, but we can't seem to.
Well, there's a People's Pledge in the Attorney General's race,
Right.
you know, as you know, which is kind of a very important one. And the Attorney General's race may be the most exciting primary going on, because that's the one that's neck and neck, you know, with Healy and Tolman. And it's, you know, two good candidates, and they're really going to slug it out. And Tolman just signed a People's Pledge with Healy to keep outside money out. Grossman has done some posturing and has already set up his own, you know, PAC,
Right.
you know, to have outside money. Although if you look at the polling here, I mean, I think that the things are pretty well set. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in that last 6 weeks. I've always felt and have lobbied personally. In many of the states I work in, you have spring primaries. And I think that years ago in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is such a Democratic state, they felt that, it was very smart to have a very late primary. But that's how we get Republican governors. I mean, look at every time we've had a Republican governor, it's because there's only like 6 weeks between that primary and the general. And this is Massachusetts, right, Joe? We have three pastimes:
right.
Sports, politics, and revenge.
You got it.
Right? So all the people, they get all wound up about their candidate, and then many of them don't go out and really participate, you know, for that final election candidate. That may indeed be, is clearly, I think, one of the reasons Martha Coakley lost to Scott Brown. It was really hard to gather everybody up together in that special election and get them all behind one candidate. And I think that puts Charlie Baker in pretty good stead this year. I think it's going to be a real race this last 6 weeks.
They're all spending money on the primary, and well, he does have a primary opponent, but I think most people expect
And I'm not
prevail.
sure. I'm not sure where Charlie's going to get his money.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not your traditional Republican these days, because he's much more liberal by, maybe not by Massachusetts standards, but certainly by national standards. So I
Will
don't
he
know,
have a harder
you know.
time raising money, you think?
Well, he's done real well raising money in state, but it's about the outside money. I don't think you're going to see the Koch brothers come in here and pull Charlie out of the hole. And I think that the Koch brothers in a state like this could be very damaging, because I'm sure they're, you know, if you polled the Koch brothers here, that, you know, people hate them because it's such a Democratic state.
But let's talk about the actual governor's race and more about the strategy and how you see it unfolding. And let's go through these candidates. Martha Coakley. Now the polls show she should, in theory, handily win the Democratic primary. Yet she didn't win the endorsement of the convention. As a matter of fact, almost came in third. What is her strategy, and is it a winning strategy?
Well, I think,
in your mind,
I think that I believe that what Coakley's strategists really did is they made a decision early on. Grossman made a decision early on. I've got to prove myself in this convention and see if I can get a bump from that. And you know, he invested a lot, and he pulled in every chit he could to make sure that he got that convention. But it was
smart move.
Well, I think it was anticlimactic. It was everybody knew. Grossman was expected to win the convention. If you're expected to win the convention, then it's not big news when you win the convention. Really, the convention news became Berwick, like you said. Martha almost got third. It wasn't that Grossman won. And so, and if you look at the polling, he didn't get much of a bump out of that. So for whatever reason, I mean, Grossman has raised a lot of money. He's spent a lot of money. He's a good guy. He's been around in Massachusetts politics. People know him. And if they know him and his poll numbers aren't any higher than they are, you know, right now, I think he's going to have a real hard time overcoming Martha, you know, in the race, because, you know, she could stumble, something could happen, but I think that you're probably looking at the nominee with Martha. Now, Berwick is very interesting, because Berwick is the darling of the true left here. And he's kind of an Elizabeth Warren candidate. And Elizabeth, I mean, they had a much longer time to do this, and it was a much more developed scenario. They raised money all over the country. And, you know, it is possible that Berwick could kind of catch fire, not only here in Massachusetts, but around the country for the Daily Coast set and, you know, others, you know, online that say we really ought to have one state where we have a true, nearly socialist, progressive person, and that person could be Dan Berwick. His fundraising has come up, but I don't see him catching fire, you know, yet.
And is he pulling all the right levers, though, to possibly put himself in that position?
I think so. I mean, he could. I think he's more likely to eat into Coakley's numbers, then eat into Grossman's numbers. And then the last kind of scenario is, Joe, is like it's all a matter, like every election, who turns out. I mean, there's not the same excitement, everybody says it, the media says it all the time, this time, as there was when Deval Patrick ran against Riley and, whoever else was in that race. That was an exciting race. It caught fire. People were pumped.
Caught people's imagination.
Yes, people were pumped about it. And it's people like, we know Coakley, we know Grossman. We're getting to know Berwick. So I don't think you have, and that election this year just happens to fall so early. It's like right after Labor Day. Right. It's the first week of September. And then it'll just be 6 weeks to the final. It'll be a straight, flat-out run.
Well, and of course, there's a couple of independent candidates
yes.
in this race. Do they have an impact?
I don't think they have.
Are they getting any traction?
Well, you have that one candidate, McCormick, who has money.
Yeah.
And, so with money in the final, let's look at, Deval Patrick's reelection. Clearly Tim Cahill being in the race clearly helped Patrick. And McCormick being in the race may help the Democratic candidate, who I think personally is going to be Martha Coakley, but it could be somebody else. But I think that McCormick, might be able to take from Baker. People know Baker. Look, right now around the country, people just generally don't like politicians at all. So if the people who are going to really decide the race are the regular people, not insiders, not people like me and you. We already know people we're supporting. But it's those people who haven't decided, the unenrolled voters in Massachusetts. They're going to swing the election. And McCormick has enough money to get his message out. They may say, I like this guy McCormick. I know Charlie Baker. I'm not think that much of him. I know Martha Coakley. I think maybe I'll give to McCormick. And I think that the Democrats, we have a strong Democrat to Republican advantage, but unenrolled voters have an advantage over Democrats on numbers.
Certainly.
So I think that McCormick could have an impact. The other couple candidates, they're just, I don't think they're happening.
Well, and last but not least, Charlie Baker. This is supposedly the new Charlie Baker, or remade Charlie Baker. But does that ring true?
Well, I think that Charlie's doing a really good job in repositioning himself.
Yeah.
I think
is it working?
Well, I think his mistake is that his anchor is going to be Karen Polito. Karen Polito is like a Tea Party.
His lieutenant governor.
Yes, he's like a Tea. But he has gone from having a lieutenant governor, Richard Say, who is gay, right, to having Karen Polito, who was the driving force against gay marriage, against transgender rights, against, and people I don't think know that yet. And I think that she's going to be a bit of an anchor. If they decided to run together because somehow that's going to get the women's vote, I don't think, she's way conservative for Massachusetts. And I think that that's yet to play out. And I think that could be a real anchor around his neck. But I think he's doing a good job. He's friendlier on the trail. I think he's learned, every time you run, you learn stuff, and I think. Well,
there's a certain comfort level that comes with it, and that's part of the reason that candidates want to pay you big bucks is to
not
show
big enough,
how,
but yeah, they do. Yeah, right.
Show them how to
exactly.
kind of connect at some level.
Right. And Martha's doing so much, but she has learned so much from that loss. We always say in my business is like, nobody ever learns anything from winning. You only learn when you lose. When candidates win, and if all they ever do is win, they just think they know it all. Hey, I've won this, I know. Yeah. And you can just see
down.
Look at Bill Clinton until he lost governor. If he didn't lose governor in Arkansas, he probably wouldn't have been president of the United States. It's people that lose. The one maybe exception to that was Barack Obama. In the history of the United States, people just, they had to lose one or two elections because that's what really, makes their mettle. It's what really teaches them. They don't forget things that they learned that first time when they lost.
Well, and speaking of that, and of course speaking about the Liz Warren, she's being touted potentially if Hillary Clinton doesn't run, or maybe even if she does run. Any truth to that?
I don't think
she denies.
Well, I don't think there's anything. But I remember when the Senate race was going on. It's like, no, I'm not running for. I'm not going to run. It was a draft movement, and that could happen again. I just don't see it happening if Hillary runs. It just doesn't. For a lot of reasons, it doesn't make sense. But I don't know. I know everybody thinks that Hillary is already on her path. I'm not sure. Look, at running for president of the United States, she's been Secretary of State, she's been the First Lady, she's been a U.S. Senator, she's getting ready to have grandchildren. Yeah. She may shock the world, and stand up and say, you know what, guess what, guys?
I don't need it.
I'm not doing it. You know, I'm not doing it. I like my life. I like my life. And I don't think that many people are entertaining that possibility because for whatever reason, it doesn't make good press or whatever. But I think that she's not 100% decided.
And of course, if that were to happen, well, all bets are off.
That's
and of
right.
course, in fact, the Republican primary, we've got just a minute or two left. Could we potentially see Mitt take another run at this? Or is that just
I think that, I mean,
wishful
frankly,
thinking
I
on
think that
on
he
the-
would be might be the strongest candidate to be able to cross over, and he did. I mean, he wasn't near as close as he thought he was, as we find out. I think that the Republicans need new pollsters. I mean, they had Eric Cantor, up 30 points, and he lost. Mitt Romney thought he was going to win the election. His polling told him he was going to. I mean, I think they just need some new, better pollsters in the Republican Party. I don't think they know what's going on.
Might, of course, the polls, speaking of that, show Barack Obama at perhaps his all-time low. And
Yeah.
so, well, nothing breeds success like success, but nothing breeds disfavor, I guess. Than,
Like being a lame duck.
Yeah,
I
being a
mean, we've seen that in the last several.
and does that
presidential
also
years.
apply to Duvall? Because there's
Yeah, I think it's so.
there's a
Although
real-
Duvall, I think there's still a lot of goodwill for Duvall, and I think that part of that is, Obama and Duvall's and Patrick's personalities are very different. And I think that it's kind of easier for people to dislike Obama. I think the other thing is just the numbers. We have so many Democrats here. If we had that many Democrats across the country,
Sure.
Obama's numbers would be through the roof.
Well, and Scott Brown, can he make that change of?
He's having a hard time. I mean,
zip
he's a good
code and-
retailer. He was a lot better on paper.
He was a good campaigner, certainly.
Yeah,
but does that?
Well, the New Hampshire's become more and more Democratic, and I think it's going to be a fight. And I think that the Republicans will put some money behind Scott, but I think Jeannie Shaheen, when the dust settles, that she's going to maintain that U.S. Senate seat there.
Well, fun to watch and very interesting, exciting. Of course, just as it always is when we have Jim Spencer in as our guest. He is, of course, the principal, the founder of the Campaign Network. They do campaigns all across the country and have for many years a real expert at it. Nice to have you here.
Thank you,
and
Joe. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for coming in and joining us. Unfortunately, we're out of time for tonight, but you're watching Talking the Neighborhoods. We're here tonight and every Monday night at the same time. We'll be back next week. Until then, for the entire staff and crew here at BNN, I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening.